Welcome to Mission Evolution Radio Show with Gwilda Wiyaka, bringing together today's leading experts to uncover ever-deepening spiritual truths and the latest scientific developments in support of the evolution of humankind. For more information on Mission Evolution Radio with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit www.missionevolution.org. And now, here's the host of Mission Evolution, Miss Gwilda Wiyaka.
When a loved one is wrestling with addiction, it's natural to want to help any way we can. But how can we tell when that very help has become draining to us and harmful to them? Mission Evolution Radio TV show is coming to you around the world on the X Zone Broadcast Network, xzbn.net. With us this hour to ponder when help becomes crippling is Candace Plattor. Candace is a professional speaker, addictions therapist in private practice, and sought after leader in the field of addiction. She's the author of the award-winning book, Loving an Addict, Loving Yourself, the top 10 survival tips for loving someone with an addiction. Her website, lovewithboundaries.com. Candace, thanks so much for joining us on Mission Evolution.
Hello, I'm happy to be here.
So, Candace, I guess you have a bit of a story about your own personal experience with addiction. Would you mind sharing?
Oh, yes. I haven't told this story for a while. When I was younger, actually in 1973, I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. Most people know what Crohn's disease is now, but at the time they didn't know what it was at all. So they gave me the wrong medications. They told me it was all in my head, all of that kind of thing. So the medications that they gave me were opioids, basically, were things like OxyContin and codeine and morphine, and any kind of drug that I wanted, I could have. It was just prescribed to me over and over and over. If you go about 15 years into the future of that, I was very addicted to these opioids. I had taken them the way they were prescribed to me. I didn't, I wasn't using them to get high necessarily, although it made me that way. But I was definitely in a bad place. I was suicidal at that point. I didn't know whether I wanted to live or not. And finally, I reached out for help about 15 years later. I was encouraged to go into a psych ward, and I did that. I signed myself in. I found out later that I might not be able to sign myself out, but I was able to. Yeah, it was a little scary. It was a scary time. And I was there for about a month, which is a long time to be in a place like that, but I really wanted the help. So at that time, I met a couple of people who were trying to get off drugs, just like I was. They were in the psych ward as well, and they were going to Narcotics Anonymous meetings every day at noon across the street. So I started going with them, and today I am 37 years clean and sober.
Oh, congratulations. I mean, that's such a tough road. Such a tough road. So, how long have you been an addictions therapist?
A little over 30 years.
Just a little while.
Yeah, just a little while. Yeah.
So, what prompted you to become an addictions therapist?
Well, it wasn't something I planned to get into. I was a teacher before that. I was also a counselor doing different kind of counseling. But the more I learned about addiction, Um, the more I could see that I wanted to be able to give back what I had gotten, the kind of help that I had gotten, um, I was also uh, feeling a little bit off with some things. I didn't agree with everything that was being said to me, and I wanted to delve into that. So so after I had about 3 years clean and sober, which is what you need here. I'm in Vancouver, Canada, and you need 3 years clean and sober to work in the addiction field. Um, I found a job in a part of Vancouver called the downtown East Side. And the downtown East Side is the logistically the place, the lowest income area in Canada. And it mostly addicts and alcoholics and homelessness and those kinds of problems down there. Um, I found a job there, and it was absolute culture shock for me, but I loved it. I loved working with the clients down there. So,
So, after working as an addictions therapist, have you learned anything new about addiction that you weren't being given when you were in therapy?
I believe so. Yep. Would
Just
you
a little
like
bit
me to?
there, right? Yeah.
Would you like me to go into that?
Yes, if you wouldn't mind
Um,
just hitting the highlights. What's different about the way you approach it now?
well, in 12-step programs, which is what I started my recovery in, it was basically the only game in town at that time, because that was back 1987 at that point. And oh, 20, what am I talking about? Yeah, it was 1987. So anyway, they were talking about uh, that we are powerless over addiction. That's what you're taught in 12-step programs. Um, that once you're an addict, you're always an addict. You have to identify as such. And if you don't, you'll probably relapse. There are these kinds of dogmas, these kinds of things that were taught in the program. And I think, in the beginning, it was fine for me. But later, I started to look at, I guess, about 5 or 10 years into the program, when I had that amount of time. I was thinking, well, I'm 10 years clean. I'm not powerless over this. I choose this every day. I make a choice about this every day. And that to me was the beginning of the end of 12-step programs for me.
And so now you've developed something I understand that kind of replaces that. Is that accurate?
Well, I guess I go with what I call the choice model. It's an empowerment model rather than it being a powerless model, because every addict, every single one of us, is either in recovery or relapsing. And it's a choice that we're making every day. It's a choice. And that choice can change. We can decide, oh, I'm finished with. Ugh. We can change that choice and become um, somebody who's in recovery, make a difference, make a different choice. We can go back to relapsing. It's up to us. We have the power over this. Nobody else has it but us.
And do you find that to be a more effective approach, even in the beginning stages?
Absolutely, in the beginning stages. Anyone who um, is is um, is going through an addictive process, And we use addiction for many different reasons. I can get into that too. But anyone who is going through this, this situation has to understand that they are making a choice about whether they're in recovery or whether they're in relapse, whether they're in addiction.
So is this a choice that you make? You said day by day, but isn't it moment by moment in the beginning?
Yes, it's actually moment by moment all the time. We just don't think about it when we get enough clean time in. We don't think that that we're having to make a choice every day, all the time, every moment, but we actually are making a choice every moment.
Well, it's about time for us to go into a station break. Candace and I will return very shortly, so don't go
Okay.
away. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. If one person in a family is an addict, is the entire family sick? With us this hour discussing the devastating impact of addiction is Candace Plattor. Candace is the author of Loving an Addict, Loving Yourself, the top 10 survival tips for loving someone with an addiction. So, Candace, let's talk about the entire family structure here. When we so far we've been talking about the individual and their personal choices moment by moment. But when there's an addict in a family, is indeed the entire family out of balance?
The entire family is out of balance because addiction affects everyone. You know, if you're in a family with addiction, with somebody else's addiction, you're affected just as much as the addict is affected, but in different ways. So we need to know what those ways are so that we can start to heal ourselves and actually do things that help the addict.
So, the default setting of someone that's in a relationship or in a family with an addict, how does that differ from the ways that we have to approach it in order to heal ourselves and the addict?
I'm not quite sure what you mean.
So there'll be a default setting that we're doing in our family. Okay, everybody be quiet, don't trigger daddy, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Um, what behaviors do we have to look at, evaluate, and change in order to turn it around so we can actually be helping?
Mm. Well, the ways that I view it is through the words enabling and helping. And most people now have heard about enabling. Most people who come to me, um, they say right at the beginning, they'll say, "We know we're enabling, but we don't know what else to do." They might not know how they're enabling. And what enabling means is that you're basically doing for the addict what the addict can and should be doing for him or herself. I'll probably use himself, just, it's just easier that way. But you're doing everything for the addict, trying to make everything okay. It's like you said, don't upset daddy, or don't upset brother, or don't upset daughter, or don't upset anybody, because the people in the family wind up having codependent behavior with the addict and sometimes with themselves as well. And one of the highlights of codependency, it's a horrible thing to have. Trust me, I know. What it looks like is somebody who doesn't want to ever get into conflict with anybody else. You just hate conflict. So you'll do anything you can to not have conflict. So actually, when you're enabling somebody else, you're actually protecting yourself more than you're doing anything else.
And that was going to be my next question is oftentimes in a family that has an addict and a bunch of codependent people, to use your words, um, the addict is the focus. Everybody believes that they're the problem,
Yeah.
but is there a certain amount of projection going on here? Are people not dealing with their own problems because they're busy assuming it's the addict?
Yes and no. I mean, it is the addict that gets all this stirred up. If the addict wasn't there, the codependency would probably stay. It would still be there, but it would probably stay pretty low. But families, what you're saying is absolutely right. Families need to learn how to deal with their own stuff and their own behaviors. They need to learn to deal with that. And once they can heal themselves or start to, they can have the boundaries, the healthy, self-respecting boundaries that they need to have with the addict in their lives until they're willing to look at themselves. And that's the empowering part of this. When they're willing to look at themselves, then that's when the family can actually help the addict more than any other time.
Do you find that the people that are codependent in a family situation with an addict tend to come from families that had an addict?
Um, it does run in families, but addiction, I mean, there's all kinds of addictions, and we use addiction for all kinds of reasons. We don't actually need to have addicts in our lives before. When, for example, a family member, a mother, for example, can come into a family and get married and have children, and she was in a family with maybe there were people who were sick. That kind of thing happened. But she learned how to not trigger different people in the family, and she learned how to be a good child, and she grew up that way, and she's like that as a mother.
And so
So
on and on it goes.
on and on it goes. And codependency is really interesting. Many traits of codependency are societally reflected well, you know. So you might say about somebody, oh, she'll do anything for people. She'll give her the shirt off her back for people, and they express that like it's a good thing, but it isn't a good thing. But she gets some validation from that, and so when she comes, because she's got an addict, when she comes in her life, when she comes to me for help, and I say, well, wait a minute, what might you be doing to keep this going? She says, I don't know. I mean, I'm such a nice person. I do anything for everybody.
And so there's never any friction that way. So the addict can kind of not be confronted with the fact that their behavior is affecting others. Is that what's going on?
That's exactly what's going on. So when an addict is enabled, when you do everything for an addict, the addict stays stuck. The addict is, you used this word before, is crippled. And it's a very, it's not a loving way to treat an addict.
So go ahead.
A loving way to treat an addict is to say, we love you so much, and we're not willing to do this with you anymore. If you choose to continue to use and to relapse and to do what you've been doing, if that's what you choose, you're going to have to do it somewhere else, because we are starting to learn about ourselves, and we care about ourselves, and we care about you so much. And this isn't what we want for you. So if you're willing to get help, anything can be revisited. But if you're going to make this choice, you're going to have to do it elsewhere. That, to me, is the most loving thing we can do for an addict.
So it short stops it before it continues to be a years and years and years and years long problem. The
Yes,
longer you exist in an addict codependent situation, does that cement the behavior even more for the addict?
it will, because why should the addict change anything that they're doing if everything is getting done for them? Why should an addict, it's like on paper, the addict has it made. I'm talking about the addicts who are living in the family home. They're being given food to eat. They're probably getting it cooked. Their laundry is probably getting done by somebody. I'm talking about that kind of addict. They're still in the family home, or maybe they're in their own apartment, but the apartment's being paid for by the family. I'm not talking about the people who are homeless on the street. That is a different thing, but the same boundaries can be used for them.
So let's talk a bit about those that are homeless on the street.
Yeah.
As I sit back and look at it, isn't the system that's the bleeding hearts that are providing everything these people need, even though they're addicts on the street?
Yep.
Aren't they the codependents in that scenario?
Yet there is so much codependency. There is so much enabling happening in government, in pharma, big pharma, in all the societies that we have, what you're talking about, different places that help people like that on the street. There's so much codependency going on that until you can break through that, it's a really hard thing to get that under control. I mean, addicts don't have to be on the street. And addicts don't have to be dying on the street.
If you were to, we stand back and we look at it, the people that are the government and the programs, they aren't necessarily educated in exactly what we're talking about, are they?
Right. So people like myself go and talk to them. Sometimes I reach them. Sometimes I reach one of them, But the codependency is really dug in, and it's hard. It's hard to try to undo it, but it has to be undone. It has to be, because governments all over the place are trying so hard to fix addiction and doing all the wrong things.
Well, it is time for us to take a commercial break. We will be right back to continue this discussion, so you stay right there. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. If the old ways are not working, are there any other options? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. With us discussing a new approach to addiction is Candace Plattor. Her website, lovewithboundaries.com. Candace, in the prior segment, we were talking about how government and addicted homeless people are in a addict codependent relationship unwittingly on the part of the governments and the ones that are making the rules and the policies. What if you could sit down and talk to these government people? What would you tell them?
I would tell them that if they don't stop enabling and start helping the addicts, then they're wasting their money, they're wasting resources. This will continue on and on and on. We'll never come out of addiction if this continues, but that there is a way for them to learn a new way of working with addicts. And, people have accused me of dealing with tough love. And they say, "Oh, we don't like tough love. We don't like tough love. We're not going to deal with this." And tough love, we've been loving our addicts to death. And it's time to start loving our addicts to life. And it's time to be saying, get up, come with me, clean yourself off, go to treatment. But in treatment, in rehab, there need to be programs for the addicts where they're learning a job. They're being given healthy food to eat. They're maybe given a gym pass for the time that they stay sober, that they're respected. They're given housing when they come out. We need to be respecting addicts enough to do what's right for them and stop doing what isn't right for them. They don't know what's right for them, clearly.
It seems like people, no matter what approach we take, addiction is still on the rise. Why would you say that is?
Because of the enabling. If we can stop enabling addicts and stop enabling families as well, everything would change, and it would change quickly. Because the reality is that most, if not all, addicts don't want to be on the street. They don't, when addicts are in a home, for example, and they're being enabled, they don't really want to be enabled. They want to respect themselves. They want to have a piece of what everybody else has, what they see around them. They want to have a wife or a husband and children and, whatever. They want to have that. They want to have a good job. They want to feel good about themselves. It seems like, on paper, an addict would like to be enabled. And they do, in terms of, it's a little scary when an addict stops being enabled, when the family stops enabling them. It's scary for them because they're going to have to change what they're doing. But they want to. And there's a place in them that wants to. And I know that. I know that personally.
If a person is dealing with, a family situation, and there is one addict and a whole bunch of codependents, where are all these codependents coming from? I mean, it has to be a learned behavior. How can we unlearn it?
That's a really good question. How do we unlearn codependency? I had to unlearn it. I had to say to myself, I don't want this in my life anymore. I don't want to feel this way about myself anymore. I don't want to be a people pleaser anymore. I want to be authentic and real. I made those choices to to change what I was doing with other people. And sometimes it can be a little lonely, you know, but I have me. I have me, and I have a me that I respect. How do we change codependency? Well, first we educate people. That's the first thing we do.
I mean, a lot of people don't even know what codependency is as
That's
far as
right.
their own behavior, right?
That's right. So we educate the families, and I have workshops, many that I have done for the families who want to be able to help the addicts that are in their lives but don't know how. Um, I have, over the past 30 years, I mean, I have seen thousands of families change what they're doing, and addiction stops. In fact, when I was working in the downtown east side, just starting out as an addictions therapist, I was writing my book at the time. I was just at the beginning of everything. I started to get calls from the families of the addicts I was working with. So there I am. My caseload is supposed to be the addicts, the alcoholics, the gamblers, all the people in the downtown east side. I was supposed to help them, basically fix them. And the families started calling me. This kind of dropped into my lap. I didn't go out and look for it. I'm so glad it did, because I had them come in. I had them come in and talk to me and tell me what was going on. And I heard all of the enabling that happens in these families just to stop them from getting mad, stop the addict from getting mad, that those kinds of things were happening. Um, as soon as I started working with the families, I started developing treatment plans for the families, because the more I heard, the more I could see the similarities that were happening in each family. Every addict is different, and every family is different, but there are so many similarities that people are doing.
So
So
what are
I,
those similarities?
um, the similarities of what we've been talking about, the the feeling of I have to make everything okay. I have to make everything okay. It's my job as the family member. It's especially true of mothers. Mothers especially want to make everything okay. And they feel incredibly guilty when the addicts are having a hard time.
So you're talking here a little bit about guilt, and that driving the codependent behavior. What about fear?
Yeah, they're guilty, they're fearful, they're devastated, they don't know what to do. They're going through the same thing over and over and over again, and they're waiting. If they're sleeping at all, they're waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and they're thinking about conversations that they've had with the addict. They're worried about the phone ringing and being told something terrible has happened to the addict. This kind of, it's the let me in, I'm here, open the door, let me in. And the addict is at the door. If the addict doesn't live there, the addict is at the door at 2 o'clock in the morning, wanting to be let in. Do you open the door? Do you let the addict in? How many times do you do that before you finally say, you're making this choice, we love you so much, but if you're going to make this choice, you're going to have to find another place to sleep tonight.
And so that puts it right back in there in the addict's court, isn't that part?
Because the addict has power over this. The addict is empowered. Yes.
So aren't they projecting? Does the addict then, in a codependent situation, project their ability to heal onto the codependent?
Sure. Let me blame somebody else. Let me blame somebody else for what's going on with me. Well, if you'd only done this to me, then I wouldn't be like this. And that's a crock. it's not true. Because, the family may be contributing to the addiction continuing, but the family is not responsible for the addict's choices. Never. This is not the planet we live on. We are not responsible for somebody else's choices. We can't be. It just doesn't work that way. So the addict needs to be given choice. The addict needs to be told that he has a choice, and that one choice may get him one set of consequences, and another choice may get him another set of consequences, and which one will he choose?
So again, the buck stops here. That's very difficult, I think.
Absolutely.
Very difficult, I think, for a lot of people because if I don't let him in, he's going to starve and freeze to death out there on his own, and et cetera, and around we go again.
Yeah,
So
but
yeah,
if you do let him in, just so he doesn't starve out there or freeze to death out there, if you do let him in, you're going to have to keep letting him in every single time. You're going to keep having to let him in, and that doesn't give any real sense of self to the addict.
well, it's that magic moment. We're going to have to take another station break. Please stay with us as Candace and I continue to explore the many facets of addiction. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. When all is said and done, are you helping or are you hurting? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. We're continuing our discussion with Candace Plattor. Her website, lovewithboundaries.com. Candace, it sounds like it would be a difficult switching time when you're going from this dyed-in-the-wool, hard-set, codependent alcohol or addict relationship in a family to one where it's helping, even if you're having to help by not opening the door for them to come in the middle of the night. Seems like there'd be a real unstable time, maybe even volatile. Would you speak to that a little bit for us?
Yeah, it can be very volatile, and the addict will often continue to test and push the limits. Um, this happens over and over and over again, especially with mental illness, with adding that to the mix. It can be a very hard time for the people in the family to believe that they're actually helping when this kind of thing happens. So it takes, I see clients usually for about 3 months. It's not supposed to be an ongoing therapy forever. They learn the habits that they need to be able to have with the addict. They learn the boundaries. They learn how to language them. They learn how to do this. We teach them how to do this. And the really interesting part is that as soon as it starts to work, they really want it. The families really want it. As soon as it starts to work, as soon as an addict respects the boundaries that are being set, the family wants more boundaries. Okay, so how do I say this to him? So how do I say that to him?
Okay.
You know?
Do you find in your practice that there are some situations with the codependent and the addict in the family where the addict just won't rally?
Yes, there are times when the person just won't. Some addicts die out there. Some addicts die in your house, you know. This is true about addiction. And I don't say that every family I've ever worked with has been successful. If they're willing to do what they need to do, and sometimes that means cutting the addict out of the family for a while, you know, they, but some addicts won't rally. Some of them just won't. That's right.
So when you're in a situation where a person has been their addiction started like when early teens, and this is unfortunately very common in this country now.
Yeah.
Do you find that they haven't really been able to mature because they've been medicated or self-medicated for all these years? Now they're in their 20s and trying to get out of it. Is there some a level of immaturity that the family can plan on dealing with?
Yeah. There's a saying that that when the age at which you started to use, especially use heavily, the age at which that started is the age that you get stuck in.
I wondered
And
about that.
yeah, and sometimes, sometimes you're stuck there for a long time, but that doesn't mean there can't be movement. And the thing is that you don't, for the family members, they have to stop condoning bad behavior. It's like the spotlight has been on the family, on the addict in the family for such a long time. The addict's used to it. He likes it. He comes to a family dinner. He knows he's gonna, you know, be the person that's watched or whatever. He doesn't really like it. He wishes it could be different, but it gets him the consequence of his choice. You know, so yeah, the families really. Need to be able to do things differently for the addict and for themselves.
And so
So
taking into consideration what development level that the addict might be in, given when they started using, is that part of a part of the therapy? Is that part of understanding and how to move forward? Kind of like
yeah,
basically reparenting them?
yes, reparenting is a great word. That's what the family has to do is reparent them. But it can move fast. It can move quite quickly because the addict isn't 14 anymore or 16 anymore. The addict is an adult when we're dealing with adults. The addict is an adult. And even a 14, 16-year-old can stop their behavior and change it around to something healthy. This can be used for anybody, any age, any time. Now, the the caveat with that is mental illness. When you've got mental health conditions on top of addiction, it can go a little bit slower. And mental health and addiction are, two peas in a pod. At least they are now.
Yeah, I was going to say you can't have one without the other. It seems like it's pretty traumatic.
Yeah.
Candace, we're at that point in the show when I get to ask you, what's your mission?
My mission is to help families know that this can all change. They can get rid of addiction forever.
That that's a worthwhile mission. What do you have the figures on the rise in addiction in our culture today?
I don't have statistics. I don't work with statistics, basically. I know what's happening out there. It's happening in Canada as well as in the US. And I just know that if we could have uh, education and prevention about enabling, that's the one thing we're really not talking about. We
Yes.
need to we need to really teach people about enabling. You are not helping when you enable.
Do you see that as being maybe something offered in schools?
I'd love to see it offered in schools. I'd love to see it offered everywhere. I'd love to see, things on lampposts, right, saying don't enable your addict. But I'm one person doing this work, and there aren't many who work like me. So you
So
know.
we've been talking about addicts as far as drug addicts, alcohol. What other kinds of addiction and codependence are out there? What else do we see?
Oh, anything can be an addiction. I mean, the drugs, the alcohol, gaming, all night gaming, where a child or an adult is up all night for nights and nights and nights. They're a mess. They're horrible. Gambling, TV, porn, chocolate. I have to be careful with chocolate. Uh, anything that, to what an addiction does is it takes us away from what we feel. And that's why people use addictions. And that's why people change, habits like watching TV, for example, into an addiction.
So
Hours and
then,
hours and hours and hours of watching TV.
so then do we just start skipping addictions? So somebody complains about all the TV time, so we move to our phone. Somebody complains about our phone time, we move to something else.
That's right.
So
Until we get to a point where we feel like we don't want to live anymore because we're so out of touch with ourselves. It's a horrible thing.
it's amazing how many levels that addiction does impact us, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and we
And
cer
codependency in our society, codependency, especially for women, but men are codependent too, uh, is kind of ingrown in our society. We are taught to accept the rules, don't question authority,
so we're basically set up for the codependent addict relationships.
Yes, until we're taught differently. And when we're
Yeah.
taught differently, when we know something, we do something differently. When we know better, we do better.
If you were to say something to our listeners right now, whether about the homeless situation or just addicts and codependents, what advice would you give them?
I think the main thing that I would say is don't give up. Don't ever give up. If your addict is still with us, don't give up. And if your addict isn't with us, maybe volunteer to teach about enabling. But don't give up because this can be stopped. There's no reason for people to be living like this anymore. It's crazy. And it's just going to get worse. So don't give up. Join us,
When you say don't give up, you're not necessarily talking about not giving up a relationship. You're talking about,
I'm talking about loving your addict enough to do the things that are right for him, even when they're hard for you.
very good. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. Candace, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Our guest this hour has been Candace Plattor, addictions therapist and author of Loving an Addict, Loving Yourself, the top 10 survival tips for loving someone with addiction. To find out more about Candace, where you can find her books and all she has to offer, visit her website, lovewithboundaries.com. This has been Mission Evolution with Gwilda Wiyaka. For more information or to enjoy past archived episodes, visit www.missionevolution.org. But please, be sure to join us right here next time. This mission will continue, bringing information, resources, and some more to our evolving world.